You think exotic pet ownership means iguanas and the occasional parrot. The reality is that thousands of American households are currently keeping animals capable of killing an adult human, animals with no domestication history, no predictable temperament, and no version of tame that actually applies to their species. There may be nearly as many tigers living as pets in American backyards right now as exist in the wild across the entire planet. Not in zoos, not in sanctuaries, in homes, basements, garages, suburban yards, owned by people with no formal training in handling an apex predator, and in most US states, no legal requirement to have any. That decision has a body count. Start with what comparable actually means in raw numbers, because the hook gave you the comparison, not the scale. Wild tiger populations across the entire planet, India, Russia, Southeast Asia, every remaining range combined, are estimated at somewhere between 4,500 and 5,500 individuals. That is the entire global wild population of the largest cat species on Earth. For years, the widely repeated figure for US private captivity put the number of privately owned tigers in roughly that same range. More recent estimates, using tighter methodology, suggest the real number is lower, likely in the low thousands, rather than matching the wild population exactly. But even the more conservative figures still describe thousands of tigers in private American hands, and the uncertainty itself is the actual story here. Some estimates run higher, some run lower, and that uncertainty is itself the point. Nobody knows the exact number. That is not a gap in this video's research. It is a genuine, documented gap in United States regulation. For most of the last several decades, there was no federal requirement to register a privately owned tiger, no centralized database. A tiger could be bought, bred, sold, and moved across state lines with less oversight than a used car. Part of why the number stayed uncountable for so long comes down to how the animals were classified. Depending on the state, a tiger could be licensed the same way as livestock, or as an exotic pet, or in some jurisdictions with no license at all. A handful of states banned private big cat ownership outright. Others required nothing more than a fee and a fence inspection that happened once, at the time of purchase, with no follow-up. An owner in one state could be operating entirely within the law, while an owner, one border over, doing the exact same thing, would be committing a crime. An animal capable of killing a full-grown bison in the wild has been living, in undocumented numbers, inside American residential neighborhoods. Here is what captivity does not change, no matter how young the animal was when it arrived in someone's home. A tiger's bite force is estimated at over 1,000 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush the skull of prey with a single bite in the wild. Its forelimbs generate enough force to break the spine of an adult deer with one strike. It can weigh over 600 pounds at full maturity, run in bursts exceeding 35 miles per hour, and possesses a hunting instinct that does not require training, does not require hunger, and does not require provocation. That instinct is not learned behavior that can be unlearned through affection. It is neurological wiring, present from birth, that no amount of bottle feeding or hand-raising removes. The skeleton behind that instinct is built for exactly one job. A tiger's retractable claws stay sharp for its entire life because they never touch the ground during normal movement, unlike a dog's, which wear down with use. Its canine teeth are equipped with sensory receptors sensitive enough to detect the exact gap between a prey animal's vertebrae and total darkness, letting it deliver a killing bite to the spinal cord without seeing the target clearly. None of that anatomy changes because the animal grew up on a couch. Its muscle structure tells the same story. A tiger's forelimbs and shoulders are proportionally more powerful than a lion's, built for pulling down prey through ambush, rather than the sustained group chases lions use. That means a captive tiger doesn't need a running start or a pursuit to generate a lethal strike. The power is available from a standing position, in the same enclosure the family eats dinner 50 feet away from. This is the part that owners of captive tigers consistently misunderstand. not through negligence, but through a specific, well-documented psychological pattern. Wildlife behaviorists call it the domestication illusion, the belief that an animal raised from infancy by a human, fed by a human, and physically affectionate with a human has transferred its instinctive behavior onto that relationship. It hasn't. A tiger raised from a cub does not become tame. It becomes habituated, comfortable in proximity to a specific person, in a way that suppresses but never eliminates the underlying predatory response. And the conditions that trigger that response, a sudden movement, an unfamiliar sound, a change in the tiger's environment, even simple play behavior that escalates past what a human body can absorb, are not conditions an owner can permanently control. Genuine domestication, the kind that produced the dog from the wolf, took thousands of years and thousands of generations of selective breeding for calm temperament. A single tiger's lifetime, even one spent entirely in a living room, compresses none of that process. It is, biologically, the same animal that has stalked the forests of Siberia and the mangroves of the Sundarbans for 100,000 years, wearing a name and answering to a whistle. Behaviorists who study captive predator incidents point to a specific failure in how owners read the animal day to day. A tiger's calm behavior and its predatory behavior draw on the same underlying nervous system, not two separate modes an owner can reliably tell apart from the outside. Play behavior, a paw swipe, a pounce, a mouthing grip during a game, uses the identical muscle groups and reflexes as a hunting strike, just at lower intensity. The line between the tiger playing and the tiger hunting is not a line the tiger itself experiences as separate categories. It is a line the owner draws afterward, usually only once it has already been crossed. The tiger does not stop being a tiger. It simply waits for a moment when the illusion and the instinct come into contact. On October 3, 2003, at the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas, Roy Horn, half of the internationally famous performing duo Siegfried and Roy, was attacked on stage, mid-performance, by a 7-year-old white tiger named Montecore. Montecore was not a wild-caught animal. He had been raised by Horn from infancy. He had performed alongside Horn for years, in front of live audiences, in a relationship the duo had publicly described for decades as one of deep trust and mutual affection. Horn had handled the animal thousands of times. During that night's performance, Montecore seized Horn by the neck in front of a live audience and dragged him off stage. Horn suffered catastrophic injuries, massive blood loss, and damage that left him partially paralyzed for the rest of his life. He survived, but the man who returned to public life afterward was permanently changed by an animal he had raised since it was small enough to fit inside a container. What actually triggered the attack has never been settled with certainty, and that lack of certainty is itself worth sitting with. One widely discussed theory holds that a specific stimulus in the crowd, a sudden movement or an unfamiliar scent, registered as something the tiger needed to investigate, and that Horn's attempt to redirect its attention became, from the animal's perspective, an obstruction. A separate account, one Horn himself maintained for the rest of his life, was that he suffered a medical episode on stage and stumbled, and that Montecore's grip on his neck was an attempt to drag him to safety rather than an attack at all. Both explanations describe the same irreducible fact. An animal raised from birth by the person it injured produced a response nobody in that arena, including its handler of decades, saw coming in time to stop it. Roy Horn never fully recovered his mobility. He continued to defend Montecore publicly for the rest of his life, insisting the tiger had tried to protect him rather than attack him. He died in 2021 from complications unrelated to the attack itself. 18 years after an animal he had raised from birth ended his career, his mobility, and very nearly his life in front of thousands of witnesses and television cameras. Roy Horn's case became famous because of who he was. It is not, according to the organizations that track these incidents, unusual in kind. Big Cat Rescue, a nonprofit sanctuary organization, has maintained a running public record of documented captive big cat incidents in the United States for decades, tracking maulings, deaths, and escapes involving privately owned tigers, lions, and other large cats. The list runs into the hundreds of entries: trainers, owners, visitors, children, employees at roadside zoos and private breeding facilities, killed or maimed by animals that, in nearly every case, the owner had described beforehand as gentle, affectionate, or basically a big house cat. The pattern across that record is consistent. The animals involved were rarely new arrivals or wild-caught adults. They were, overwhelmingly, tigers that had been raised in captivity from cubs, animals whose owners had the most direct, hands-on relationship with them, and the most confidence that the relationship changed what the animal was. Many of these incidents share another detail: the cub-petting pipeline. Roadside operations across the country have historically bred tiger cubs specifically so paying visitors can hold and photograph them during the brief window, a few months, before the animal becomes too large and too dangerous to safely handle. Once that window closes, many of those cubs are warehoused, sold to private owners, or, in the worst documented cases, simply disappear from any record at all. The public only sees the harmless cub stage. It almost never sees where that same animal ends up 2 years later. That pipeline depends on a constant supply of new cubs, which means constant breeding, which means the operations built around it have every financial incentive to keep producing animals faster than the country has safe, regulated places to put them. Accredited sanctuaries, the kind vetted by organizations like the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, routinely report waiting lists of tigers needing placement after being surrendered, seized, or abandoned by owners who realized too late what they had taken on. Demand for cute cubs and capacity for full-grown tigers were never the same market, and the gap between them is where most of the neglect and danger in this system originates. In 2020, the docuseries Tiger King introduced global audiences to a segment of American culture built almost entirely around private tiger ownership and breeding, roadside zoos, unregulated cub-petting operations, and owners keeping dozens of tigers with minimal oversight. What the series treated largely as spectacle was, underneath the personalities, a documentary record of exactly the regulatory gap this video opened with: an apex predator, bred and sold with less federal oversight than a firearm, in numbers nobody could precisely count. In December 2022, the United States passed the Big Cat Public Safety Act, federal legislation restricting private ownership and breeding of tigers, lions, and other big cats, and requiring existing owners to register their animals with federal authorities for the first time in American history. The law exists because of an accumulated public record that had become impossible to ignore, a record built case by case, animal by animal, over decades, in a country where anyone could look at that record and still believe their own tiger was the exception. That belief is the actual mechanism behind every case in that record. Not malice, not carelessness in the way people usually picture it. Certainty, misplaced, specific, and permanently unverifiable until the moment it's tested. Here is what even the researchers who study human-wildlife conflict in captivity still cannot reliably predict. There is no known combination of raising conditions, bonding history, or training regimen that reliably prevents a predatory response in a captive big cat over the full span of its life. Some tigers, raised identically to Montecore, never attack their handlers. Others do, with no discernible difference in upbringing that predicts which outcome you get. Wildlife behaviorists describe this as a fundamental limit of the science, not a gap waiting to be closed. A tiger's threat response and predatory drive systems are not fully mapped, not fully predictable, and not reliably suppressed by any environmental intervention available to a private owner. The animal that has never shown aggression in 10 years of contact is running the same neurological hardware as the animal that attacks in year 11. Part of why the science stalls here is access. Ethical research on predatory triggers in large carnivores can't be run as a controlled experiment on a living tiger. Researchers are largely limited to reconstructing incidents after the fact, which means every case study arrives after, not before, the outcome it's trying to explain. The field is working almost entirely in hindsight. There is a related pattern researchers have noticed across species, not just tigers. The longer an incident-free relationship runs, the more confident an owner becomes, and the more that confidence itself becomes a risk factor. Handlers with the most years of contact are not the ones who escape these statistics. In the recorded incidents Big Cat Rescue and similar organizations track, many of the people injured or killed had worked with the specific animal involved for years, sometimes decades, without a prior incident. Experience did not accumulate into safety the way it does with, say, driving a car or operating machinery. It accumulated into familiarity, and familiarity is precisely the variable this video keeps returning to. Nobody, not the owners with the most experience, not the trainers with the most contact hours, not the behaviorists who have studied these animals for careers, can currently tell you, in advance, which tiger that is. The video that made you want one did not show you this. It showed you a cub, soft-eyed, clumsy, held against someone's chest like an infant. It did not show you the same animal at 400 pounds, with a bite force that ends a human life in seconds, still carrying the exact same instinctive architecture it was born with, just larger, stronger, and more capable of acting on it. Somewhere in the United States, right now, in a residential neighborhood, in an enclosure a family built themselves, that animal is living behind a fence rated for something much smaller than what it actually is. It has not been tamed. It has been waiting.